For this meeting of the Wauwatosa School Board, it's Monday, September 16th, 2013, 7 p.m. in the Administration Building Boardroom, lower level. We'll begin this meeting with a moment of silence and in thoughtful reflection and consideration of the loss of our dear friend Lois Weber this week. Thank you. Mrs. Galante, please call the roll.
Mrs. Fee? Here. Mr. DeRose?
Here.
Mr. Croner?
Here.
Mrs. Muehlfeld? Here. Mrs. Randall?
Here.
Mrs. Rios?
Here.
Mr. Meyer?
Here. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into a debate with members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. Is there anyone present who would like to comment on a non-agenda item? Seeing that there's no such comment, we'll move to approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion or action? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Fee. Is there a second? Thank you, Mrs. Randall. Is there any board discussion on the consent agenda? Is there any community comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none, Mrs. Galante, please will you call the roll?
Mrs. Fee?
Yes.
Mr. DeRose?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Rios?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes. Mr. Croner, recognitions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. State Superintendent Tony Evers announced 167 Wisconsin Title I School of Recognition Awards for the 2013-2014 academic year in an honor that recognizes success in educating students from low-income families. Of the 167 schools statewide, a total of 14 schools received the High Achieving Award and a total of 26 received the High Progress Award. Wilson School ranked as one of 6 schools from 167 statewide to receive both the High Achieving and High Progress Awards. The basic criteria for a Wisconsin Title I Schools of Recognition Award are: the school receives federal Title I aid because the school has significant numbers of students from low-income families, and that's based on federal free and reduced price school meal income guidelines, and the school meets the state's test participation and attendance goals. In addition, criteria for high-achieving schools are: meet all annual measurable objectives for achievement and graduation, have achievement gaps that are less than 3 points between students' groups or show evidence of reducing gaps, and demonstrate high achievement at the school level. High progress schools must also meet the following criteria: fall within the top 10% of schools experiencing growth in reading and mathematics for elementary and middle school students, or the top 10% of schools with the greatest improvement in high school graduation rates, and have achievement gaps that are less than 3 points between student groups or show evidence of reducing gaps. Each school will receive a plaque and $500 at an awards ceremony on October 8th at the state capitol, hosted by State Superintendent Evers.
Thank you, Mr. Croner. We will now move to the action items. We have 2 human resource items. Mrs. Rios, please will you read them?
It's recommended that the school board approve the administrative contract of Seth Larson as Longfellow Middle School Associate Principal effective August 28, 2013 for 221 days per year at a salary of $77,000 prorated to days worked. And the second one is, it's recommended that the school board approve the revisions to benefit policies 3422 administrators, 3422A professional staff members, 3422B educational assistants, and 3422E select employees, as discussed in the Human Resources Committee meetings of July 29th and August 26th. And I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Croner. Is it okay with the board if we vote on these together? Okay. Dr. Earl, you asked to make a comment regarding our new administrative hire?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Meyer. Mr. Larson is here this evening, and we'd like to welcome him to the district, although he's been at work for 2 to 3 weeks already. But if you, Mr. Larson, you have anything you'd like to share?
Yeah. Talk loud, but I'll use the microphone if you want. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you guys for the opportunity. I've been trying to get in the Tosa School District as an English teacher for like the last 5 or 6 years. I had interviews at West, a couple applications at East. Never was able to get in. I have family members that gush about the district. My nephew goes to Whitman now as a 6th grader. My niece is moving up, and my wife and I actually have a showing. We're looking at houses already on Wednesday. So, I mean, I'm really excited to be here, and thank you again. So.
Well, thank you. We're excited to have you. Is there any board comment on either of these items? Mr. Croner, please.
We just have a brief summary of the policy changes that are being recommended.
Dr. Ertl, will you provide a summary?
Shannon.
Mr. Chanin will provide a summary.
I'd be happy to do that.
I think that's on. There we go. This is part of our process of just kind of making sure that our language is a little bit more standardized and a little bit more coming together. There are probably a couple more policies that you'll see coming before you as we get through all employee groups. For the administrator policy, we just added a definition of full-time. And we did that with all the policies that you see here before you because we reference benefits that full-time people get and not full-time. So we add that definition for clarity's sake to all 4 policies. For our professional staff policy applicable to teachers and our educational assistants and our select employees, we clarified the long-term disability insurance to make it standard across the board. It's not a change in the benefit level, but it just made all of those policies read the same. For our, well, I shouldn't say exactly the same, administrators are slightly different, but for our, we also clarified and made standardized the life insurance language entitlement, which impacted the educational assistants, the select employees. Those two had that change to bring them in line with the other policies. And then last but not least, there was a clarification with the select employees' early retirement benefit. It's again not a change in benefit level, but a change in the language to make it clearer. It had some references to what happens when you hit Medicare eligibility, and that language was non-standard across other policies. So we brought those into line in terms of language with the other policies, and that basically is that those employees lose their entitlement to post-retirement health insurance benefits once they become Medicare eligible. And with those groups, like we do with all the other groups, we do provide a Medicare coordinating plan that they can then buy into. But we changed the language so that it was clear.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chanin. Is there any other board question or comment? Is there any community question or comment? Seeing none, Mrs. Galante, please will you call the roll?
Mrs. Fee?
Yes.
Mr. Giroux?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Rios?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes. Motion carries 7-0. You're hired.
Now you can actually work legally.
Oh, you were working for free before, but no, not really.
Prorated as of
Not
today.
really.
Yeah.
No, so, Mr. Chanin, please, the Human Resources Report area, the teacher retention report.
Okay, this report is an update of a report that we did earlier in the summer. Obviously, in June, the picture looks different than it does come September when the school year is underway. This report, we isolated just the teacher turnover, so we're looking just at the teacher numbers as opposed to district overall staff. What you'll see is that our turnover rate since 2010 has increased and is now sitting at 10.64% for overall turnover for teachers. We put in a benchmark standard there of 9.8%. There's not a very good benchmark. I think most school districts have been not overly concerned about turnover because it's so much less than it is in other industries. I think the effect of seniority rules and contracts and Act 10 bargaining or pre-Act 10 bargaining made turnover less of an issue for most school districts. That turnover benchmark is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics for Midwest academic environments. It, however, is heavily skewed towards post-secondary institutions, but it is a benchmark that we can find. I think that you will find anecdotally that our trend line here is not is typical of districts in the surrounding area. Anecdotally, that turnover rate is as high as 18 to 20% in some of the surrounding districts. Some districts experienced higher turnover last year and then dipped down this year. But anecdotally, this is a trend line that's happening around the area. One thing to keep in mind when we talk about percentages, fewer staff can cause a higher percentage increase. In 2010-11, we did adjust our staffing formula. So we did experience a drop in FTE over the last 2 school years. I didn't include here 2013 because this is a backward-looking report. But as we know from the staffing report, we projected to go up about 4 FTE. And so if we start mapping on here the next school year, there's a slight increase projected or actual, but just so we put that perspective out there. I prepared for you a summary of just the reasons in terms of FTE for the different classifications as to why people exited. What is really different about the past couple of years over prior years is that typically retirements account for twice the number that it does there, and resignations are a little bit lower. So that compounds to give us a higher overall turnover rate. Last year we had actually lower than expected retirements, with not all of our eligible early retirees choosing to retire. So we actually went with slots unfilled, so to speak. We have a cap every 2 years of 25. When you look at exits by school, all right, we broke that down for you so that you could take a look at kind of where the leaders were. It's not a surprise that the schools that are largest also have the largest number of people. I think if you look as a percentage of teaching staff, the alternative school probably had the largest exit rate, since that was 50% of the teachers at the school. But the ones with the largest overall absolute value numbers, East, I think Roosevelt's on there as well, in terms of an elementary school, tend to be some of our larger schools, but obviously East is a outlier in terms of percentage. We looked at the top 3 schools, East, Madison, West, and Roosevelt, in terms of absolute number, and I just kind of put up there for you the percentage of overall staff. Again, East and Madison being slightly outliers. When you're looking, though, at reasons, we also broke that down in terms of percentage of the turnover at that school. So there was a small amount of reductions in terms of layoffs, which would be an involuntary. And then in Madison, a significant percent were relocations out of state. I think that one of the important things to look at when we look at this issue is the demographics of who is departing when we're talking about resignations. In terms of the average years of service of people leaving, it's 8.73 years, whereas the district average years of service is 11.51. And that 8.73 is the average years of service minus retirement. I didn't calculate it total average of those who left. I apologize for that. When you look at the average salaries of those who in the district, it's $52,000. And when you look at the average salary for those retiring, when you take out retirements, it's $42,000. I think what's striking about that is that the average years of service, 8.73 versus 11.51, those 3 years of service, depending on where you fell when you were hired, impact your average salary by about $10,000. And that really is a product of the way in which we've bargained over a series of bargains and had a number of compressions. And when you look at really who was leaving, they are people who were negatively impacted by prior salary structures. And again, I want to emphasize that that's not a negative necessarily of bargaining, but a fact that the assumptions underlying those bargains about future step movement and future lane movement were undercut by changes in legislation. And so that wasn't necessarily a bad or a good, it's just a fact that kind of happened. And again, when you look again at the average age within our district, the people leaving tended to be younger on average than the people who were staying. So what we see is our people in that early but established in the profession range, who are getting below that 8 years, who are younger, more mobile, and who through placement on the salary schedule are on average lower compensated in the district, being a group that's mobile and leaving. When you looked at the reasons, and these are from the exit interviews, and the exit interviews was not 100% of those leaving, but it was those who participated in that process. Salary was something that was mentioned frequently in the interviews, 7 times. I always want to caution that putting numbers to a qualitative interview are not always appropriate. Those interviews are done to form context to the survey and not necessarily to quantify. But as you can see, salary and not feeling valued in a sense of dissatisfaction were two of the top rated reasons, along with location and retirement. There were a number of people who left because of where the district they were going to was right, in terms of close to my family, same district my kids go to, that type of reason. When asked what teachers liked most about their jobs, really what people liked were the students and the coworkers. I mean, it's not surprising that what makes it a satisfying environment are those things that most immediately impact where you are. There were a range of other responses, but really there was a strong tendency in the exit interviews to really value the Wauwatosa community in terms of its parents, families, and coworkers were almost universally mentioned. So, teachers were more diverse in their interviews about what they disliked about their job, and you'll notice that that's more categories because more different things were mentioned. There were some pretty consistent concerns about the pace of change or how change is managed within the district. Salary, not surprisingly, came up as an area of dissatisfaction. And some feeling of not being trusted by administration or supported by decisions administratively in terms of how that impacts their classrooms. So, but then there was a diversity of other reasons that were kind of unique to certain interviewers. Interestingly enough, in terms of the big picture question of would you recommend Wauwatosa as a place to work, 14 people said yes or yes with some qualifying statement after it. There were a couple people who did frankly say they would not recommend teaching as a profession, not necessarily because of Wauwatosa, but just because of concerns about the direction of the teaching profession. So we saw that as part of the discussion in those interviews. These slides are really repeats of the slides from the last presentation with some slight adjustments. The number rating, oh, let me miss a slide. Rating our health plans as a 3 or 4, it dropped a couple of percentage points as the survey continued to open up. It was about an 89. And the cost of our health plan dropped a couple percentage points, but still within a fairly positive range in terms of its overall quality. The number one area of improvement remained compensation and benefits from June, when we initially done this presentation, to today. And then we updated the number of respondents who are leaving to work in another district in terms of the online survey was 8. So it was a slightly higher group. As you see here, the overall job satisfaction continues to be high, even as we expanded it. Although if you recall from the earlier presentation, it was over 90%, and so there was a slight drop in overall in terms of an average. That number actually kind of goes down slightly, 2 to 3% for that and for collaboration within department. But otherwise, those numbers are relatively stable from what they were in June. Again, the concerning number really being that morale within the school, which was something that was borne out by the exit interviews in terms of what was said. There was a split. There were those who were leaving who felt very strongly that this is a positive place to work, and those who were leaving who felt it was not. That's the end of the formal presentation. I imagine that there are probably questions. So,
Board questions? Mrs. Muehlfeld, please.
Thank you, Dan. Mr. Chairman, that was very, very good. I think this is an area that we want to have, at least I want to have more information on. I just have a couple questions just to start off with on the report. How many teachers actually left the district? Because when I looked at the would you recommend slide, I was coming up with a number of 23.
correct. That's the number that participated in those last group of slides.
Okay.
Were from the survey result, from the exit interviews.
Okay.
We exit interviewed.
So I guess my question is, just
Not
from an
overall.
overall perspective, if obviously our teaching staff is of utmost priority, and as we move forward here and look at what we can do, being that we know teachers are becoming a lot more mobile, we're understanding what the environment is right now. How can we continue to retain them? I know that the administration has some plans, but I just want to get my arms around more how many teachers are leaving, how do we go about benchmarking the exit interview process? Is that the process that gives us the most information on this process? And it just seems to me that we're not capturing a lot of the staff in the exit interviewing process, or I don't know. I mean, I guess that's my question to you. I'm not sure based on the numbers.
Sure. I mean, I think that the reality is, in terms of overall participation, it's over, it was 48.8% who participated in that process, either online or interview or both. I'd say it's a representative sample. I think we got both good and bad. I actually think that we actually got a fairly good picture. That said, I think that it can be done better. Really, the benchmark of exit interviews is to outsource them. And certainly, I had a discussion with Dr. Ertl, and it would be my recommendation that we explore the possibility of outsourcing exit interviews in terms of giving it a fuller picture, a standardized question format, and being able to provide different information to the board. So there's There were multiple questions in there, so let me see if I can remember them
No,
all.
it's okay.
So-
I didn't want to take you down a different path that you weren't ready and to allow the other board members to ask questions. But that is along my thinking of how can we make this a more robust process so we really can target, we can really target retention.
Sure,
And
it should
really
be
understand what people, want of us and how we can retain them, especially through this, we know, difficult period of that 8 to 10 year cycle.
Just a comment on that. I think it's important to remember what we are working on with the compensation system, and there's a gap. And Dan mentioned that and talked about that area where people have been in the lower, they've been here a while and haven't had significant increases, and that's going to be addressed in that compensation system, and we intend to have that brought to the board in November, at least have the work completed for the 14-15 school year, and that's really a target area of people that we're going to address and adjust in that schedule. So that's an important piece, and I think significantly when people have left, it's for salary purposes, it's that group that has been in here for a number of years and have, obviously if they're going to other districts making more money, it's a different place on the schedule.
Drew?
Yes.
Mrs. Rios, please.
Thank you, Mr. Shanen. My question is about the staff that are coming into our district that require a mentor and how we're providing them the best mentor without overburdening the teachers that are experienced that we have and giving them mentors, especially in the schools that have had higher turnover, ones that are, at the secondary level, hopefully within their content or in the same school. How are we ensuring that that's happening?
Sure. Start with, I think about a third of our teachers who are hired are either professional educators or master educators. So out of the 60 or so, 22 of them are beyond the stage of mentoring, where we're really expecting. They were hired because we expect them to bring good things to us, not for us to be supporting them in the way you'd support an initial educator. We haven't had... It's been pretty typical in terms of a year, in terms of assigning mentors. There's always at this point of the year where I am working with principals still to identify a mentor, but we've found a couple of things. One, really best practice in terms of mentoring isn't about finding a match between instructional area or even building. Ideally building simply because it's convenient. We're really looking for people with good pedagogy, and for the last few years I've been repeating to principals not to simply default to someone within their content area or even someone within their building, but selecting mentors who are good at pedagogy. That's what we're looking for. That said, they typically are within their field. The other thing that we've been working on and actually moving towards is doing some experimentation with group mentoring. We really had some very good success with that when we did the Spanish program. We brought in a fairly large group of initial educators to do our elementary Spanish, and then we hired one experienced professional educator, and we found it was really effective to group mentor. And so depending on the comfort level of the principal, the comfort level of the mentor, we have been pairing people as well at times. But again, I don't see that necessarily as a fault, but as actually an intentional strength, and it was something that we moved to intentionally to look at grouping and pairing outside of saying, is it a stress on staff? It was actually something intentional. So it really hasn't been an unusual year in terms of the mentoring program. We found some real benefit in terms of grouping, and we've been able to find mentors, and so it's been a good process matching them so far this year.
And is being a mentor, it's voluntary, and is there any, right?
Yeah, it's voluntary.
And is there any sort of, maybe not monetary compensation, but
we pay $1,000 a mentor. So if you're mentoring a group of 4 or 5, you're getting a $5,000 stipend to do a group mentoring. I mean, there is obviously a little bit more work when you're mentoring multiple people, but it's a direct monetary compensation for that.
And I have one more question,
Sure,
if
go
it's okay. My other question is, you know, there's some things we can't control always in this presentation, like salary. It's, you know, there's limits to that. But it seems to be something, at least from the people that participated in this, that included morale, right? These reoccurring themes. And it seems like that would be something we can do something about, right? So I don't know if this question, Dr. Erdl, you want to jump in, but is there anything that's being done, any discussions right now in the buildings that maybe had a higher turnover, really on all the buildings, because I think this is something that should be discussed, that what can we do, or what is it that's causing people to respond this way, try to pinpoint it down, and what can we do to improve it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that you want to, at least I'll get granular to the point where we pinpoint the exact reason why someone leaves. I think we can go through every single person that left, and everybody has a different story of why they left. But I think you try to look overall and say, okay, compensation, what can we do with compensation? I think a couple things have been addressed. Not direct compensation, but health insurance, for example. We had a good year because of good consumerism by the people that were on the plan and able to give money back to the employees, $2,400 for those with family plans. That relates to a compensation piece. I think that's a positive. We're hoping to bring a recommendation to the school board for an agreement with the WA for the teachers for this current year, which might be the earliest that we've ever been able to accomplish something like that. And then, like I mentioned, moving into a compensation system for 14-15 and have that completed in a good time where people that might start looking for other jobs will at least be able to recognize what they're going to be paid for 14-15. I think what we're struggling with, morale, climate, all those issues, those are important things, and I think we just need to be cognizant of it. Communication is a big thing, making sure people wanting to be here, and I want people in Wauwatosa that want to be here, and I want to make sure that we have an environment that they want to come, they want to stay, and they want to work with our kids. I think we've got tremendous schools. I think we've got tremendous support from professional development in a lot of different areas, and communication's a big part of it. Listening, you know, the whole concept of working collaboratively, a lot of those things we're doing. Our evaluation system, moving to a different evaluation system, PLCs, talking about how we do scheduling, looking at our student services, providing support for PBIS, all of those culture things. And the reality is every single building has a little bit different culture, and you know, it takes a little bit different to manage that. And you know, I think we need to keep doing the positive things. I think pay is a good thing. I think it sends a message. But I think all those other pieces that we work on, our whole district development plan, I could go through probably every one on the list and say all of that is geared to make sure that our kids are getting the best education. And when teachers, I think, are under the belief that that's what we're geared toward, and we're trying to give that kind of support to make sure they can do what they need to do in the classrooms, I think that's going to continue to make a difference. So I think, you know, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but Act 10 has had an impact, and it's forcing us to operate a little bit differently as a school district, and that involves different types of communication and different ways of operating, interacting with staff, and you know, I'm certainly committed to really trying to address that, because whether or not we talk about other districts at 18 to 20% turnover, and I know that article from Marshfield had the highest turnover, a third of their staff in 3 years, and all these other districts. Personally, I really don't care about all the other districts. I care about Wauwatosa, and I guess maybe that little competitive edge of saying we're that much better than those other districts and we need to remain that way. So it's kind of a passion and a drive that I have to make sure we're doing those things.
Thank you, and thank you. And I know that this isn't a problem isolated to Wauwatosa, but like you said, I don't think that makes it acceptable, you know, to have high turnover. And if you have good climate in the buildings, I do think that it will then be portrayed to the students, right? That's really the reason I asked, so thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rios. Mrs. Randall?
We do have good climate in the buildings. We have great climates in our buildings. I am in there frequently talking to staff and kids, parents in the buildings and in the community. We have great climate in our buildings, and I appreciate all the work you've done on this over the months. But when we look at the number of people we're talking about, I'm starting to worry that we need to get our human resources work in another direction, and that's with our people who are here. Not only the new people, but the people who have chosen to stay. In every, I think 5 people were concerned about not feeling valued. You know, there are probably 30 other people in that building that did feel valued. So a lot of this is about the person. Sometimes the person is ready to leave. Sometimes they're not willing to work through an issue. We have long-term people here that are committed to the highs and the lows. We have people on this board and in this administration that are committed to communication. But I really have a problem with, you know, having these meetings and then reading in the paper the next day. You know, I run into a neighbor that said, oh my God, what's happening at East? You know, is the sky falling in there? And I say, go to East. Go to East. Any day, any class, talk to any teacher. You will not be disappointed. So, yes, we need to know this stuff, but I think there's a point, especially now, because, yes, Act 10 is a big deal, and yes, all other districts are having these same issues, very same issues. I would like to see us focus on our people who are here, ask these same kind of questions. Let's find out from the people who are here what they want and need or what is lacking. I really feel like we need to get our energies and our resources going in the direction of what we're talking about here. So that said, I'm committed to doing that. I know that everybody on the board is, Dr. Ertl is, all of our directors have shown that repeatedly. So I would like some good news to come out about this district. We do have good climate in our buildings.
Thank you, Mrs. Rendell. Anyone else? Mr. Croner, please.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Thank you for that presentation. It's always easier to discuss something when you have some data around it, I think. I had a question that came up that was related to the age of service. It was like 8.7 years for the average age for teachers that were leaving.
Length of service, yeah.
I don't know if you calculated this, but what for the people that we hire, do we stay within that range of new hires throughout the district, or is it,
Yeah,
do we skew lower generally? Just
Yeah, in terms of age, in terms of length of service. I would imagine, I did not do a length of service. I did a licensing, so I can say that 22 of them have been teaching at least 5 years, and 2 of them are master's educators and have probably been teaching at least 10. I know there were a couple that I hired at the very end who had been teaching 17, 18 years. And then the other group of 40 or so are initial educators, but that doesn't mean they're all first year, and usually it doesn't. Usually they're 3 to 5. So I didn't do that calculation, but I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up right on average in terms of what we hired.
And when you looked at the data, there were more teachers leaving East this year than usual, a pretty big number.
Correct.
When you looked at the data, especially the survey data, were there any answers that seemed more common to that group than others that might have given you some insight into why there was a bigger exit from East? Did you have any conclusions in that area?
Sure. When I looked at that particular data and looked by school, and there's a reason we didn't present by school, and that's because, just so you're aware, so we did look at that, is that for those schools where there were individuals, it would reveal answers.
Mm-hmm.
So we tended away from that. I will say that at East, salary was mentioned most frequently. And I won't say universally, but a high percentage of those from East who responded mentioned salary. They are also demographically in that group that we described as a known concern about salary versus years of service. So it's really not surprising. I think that there was a group hired, there's kind of a hiring boom in a certain number of years where there was high retirements from East. And so if we're to track this back to 7 to 8 years ago when that group of people were hired, it's because there were a large number of retirements that year. So it doesn't necessarily, I think it would be predictable that if those are the demographics we're looking for, that's who would be leaving. That makes sense.
Okay, and my last isn't really a question, it's more of a comment for you and for the board, and Dr. Earl, I think. We had an in-service recently, and we talked about some of the comments from the public were about listening to public comment. And I have to say, I was thinking about that as you were presenting, because we did receive some letters and comments from the public about teacher turnover in the spring, and it did lead to this study, which I think was a good thing. But it caused me to think about this a little differently, because when I was answering some people, it reminded me that we focus so much on student learning that it occurred to me that we need to also focus on, and maybe just for me, I'm just saying this for me, I'm viewing it differently, even though I've been on the board for a while, that we also need to focus on creating stable careers for teachers. And I could maybe even suggest that as a board goal, that we make that a specific goal, that one of our goals is to create stable careers for teachers, because I think in the long run, we want people, quality people, to come here and to stay a while, to know that they have a stable career with us, because I think that will increase student learning in the long run. And I know we have a number of different initiatives kind of focused towards that, but what I'd like to suggest is maybe that if we have that as a specific goal, maybe we could put together a more general plan that's maybe called Stable Careers in Wauwatosa or something, just to make up a name, where we list or describe all the initiatives that we're putting together to address teacher retention, and I don't really like that word because it sounds too stale, to address this issue. Because I think the overall goal, taking what triggered this study and the information that comes out of it, and knowing that Act 10 has changed the environment to make it more competitive between school districts, that we really do need a goal in our district saying we want people to come here and to know that they're going to be respected and have stable long-term careers. And I think as a board, if we can focus our energy in that direction, maybe in that way, it will help broadcast that message out beyond our community. That will help with recruitment and help keep the good teachers that we have. So those are my comments in that area.
If I may, I'll add to Mr. Croner's comment that, to my memory, this school district in the past, now in the 10th year, has not laid off a single teacher for budget reasons that I can recall. We have had a couple of layoffs where teaching emphasis has changed, and it was a certification question. But in the face of all of the budgetary challenges we've had, this district has not laid off teachers for budgetary reasons. So in that vein, we are a very stable place for teachers to work. There's other factors in stability as well, continuity of health insurance benefit levels and things, things like that, and professional development. I'm sure that everybody could list a lot of things, but we do try in that regard. So is there any other board comment or question? Yes, Mrs. Mufeld.
I just have another question on how can we continue to move forward on this process? I know that administration is preparing more of a plan, and when might we expect that?
Sure, I think that, the next big step, retention is an overall thing, and it encompasses many things. The reality is the next step is that pathway forward in terms of the salary schedule pay plan. That's really the next big piece. We're meeting again on September 27th with that committee. We're really hoping to finalize and have a product to present to the board in November. I think when you look at the comments about salary, frequently that was the context of it, which is they want to see a path forward. And, in terms of where we're looking at a model that will provide a career path so that someone can come in, see where they're starting, where they may be, and what types of behaviors will lead them to progress through the salary schedule, and reward behaviors that will have impact on student learning and on leading the district forward. So, just the type of thing that you're asking about is the kind of thing I think that'll come forward in November. I think that committee work has been going well. I also kind of want to point out some of your own actions that you've already done in terms of retention. The reality is this board made a decision to maintain its early retirement benefits. for its teaching staff. And tonight you passed yet another tweaking of the professional benefits policy. And I think it's significant that that's something that stayed there. And I think it's significant that when we look at these numbers and talk about resignations, we also need to look at these numbers and talk about the fact that our retirements were down, that there were certainly eligible people to retire, and that those people felt stable enough to stay and not exit at their first opportunity. So many of the things that the board is already doing and that we're doing as a district is supporting that long-term continuity, and we see it in the very turnover numbers that we're talking about today in terms of having lower retirements, that there is a confidence, I think, that people don't feel that they need to exit at their first opportunity simply because, the board has the authority to take that away, because they haven't, and they've been very stable on that. So I think there's some positives in this report as well. There's obviously something we need to address for those early career teachers. We need to have that pathway forward, but at the same time, you've been making policy choices that I think have had a positive impact on this number.
Well, let me ask my question a little differently. More on the employee relations overall aspect of, for example, if I'm an employee, I would want to continue to know why Wauwatosa is the best place for me. And I, can echo Mrs. Randall's earlier comments on being in the buildings, talking with students, and how exciting it really is to see our staff at work, to see the new staff coming in and how excited they are. And also the returning staff and the retirees who come and are still involved in the district. But what can we do from that perspective, that employee relations perspective, continuing to, this is why Wauwatosa is the best place for you, because again, we have increased competition with our surrounding districts, and there are many components to employee relations, as we just discussed. So is there any work being put into that necessarily, or?
Yes.
No? Okay. I thought there was.
Yeah,
That's why.
Employee relations is an ongoing effort. I mean, there's the continuation of the efforts, by Dr. Ertl going around to all the buildings. That's important. Human Resources makes an effort to get out twice a year to all the buildings separately to talk about our benefits and talk about, answer questions about, what's on your pay stub, that kind of information. So there's kind of ongoing efforts to that. In the Human Resource Department specifically, we talked about adding visits to the school to reach out to individual employees, particularly those in the district, just to make sure that things are going well. That'll be kind of a new add this year. And then obviously I've had conversations with principals. I've had conversations specifically with Mr. Hughes just about that relationship aspect. I mean, it's a constant, ongoing process that needs to be at the front of your mind. It's not necessarily it's not a program. It's a personal viewpoint. It's a personal philosophy in terms of customer service towards our staff, in terms of reaching out and making them feel valued as they are. So it's, if you're looking for a program, I don't know that there is it. Are there concrete steps we're taking to actualize our philosophy? Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other board question or comment? Is there any community comment? So please state your name and your address.
Sure, my name is Patrick Coffey. I'm at 1850 North 72nd Street. I just wanted to speak and as a concerned parent, and I was here last summer, and Dr. Ertl was very kind to meet with myself and 3 other parents, 90-minute meeting with us on the fly in the summer. He was very nice and talking about all this and hearing us out. And I was very encouraged about that. I was very encouraged. It sounds to me, Mr. Cheney, in your report, it's morale and money. Morale and money. See, money first, morale second. And so, Dr. Ertl, I again appreciate you communicating with the staff this year. And also, you said something at the last meeting that was really encouraging to me, and that is, we're not going to do any new initiatives. We're not going to keep throwing new things. We're going to do the things we have and do them right. And I think if that strategy would be very encouraging to your staff to say, let's do what we're doing now and do it right, instead of grabbing the newest thing that's out there. Because you can carpet bomb a million ways in education, but if you do the couple things right and celebrate those things, I think that would be a ticket to success. I think it takes a lot to have a teacher, I'm a teacher myself, to have you leave. It takes a lot, and it's not just a couple $1,000s, it's a lot that's going to have you leave. And you hit that 8.5-year mark where they don't see a future. And those are your stars. Those are the ones you've trained. Those are the ones you count on in your committees and your building leaders, and they're being offered more in neighboring districts. It takes a lot for them to go, and when they're having a family and maybe a house. So I really think that money issue is going to be big to be able to make sure that we are competing with the people around us and not losing out to neighboring districts that keep picking things up here or there. The last thing I say, and I say this with great reservations, and this would be to the board, it seems to me that the state legislature and our own personal legislators in Senator Vrookmere and Representative Koyenga, while being very nice people, are not putting public education at the forefront as a priority. And I'm wondering if the board has discussed other ways in which we aren't relying on Madison, but rather we look within to increase revenue so that we can offer more of a package to be competitive with other districts, other competing districts. I say referendum, I don't know that much about it. And I know that's a taboo term in our political world here, but is there a way that we can say, look, we can't count on Madison? And what can we do here? Because I think you would get surprisingly more support than you might think, just in conversations that I had with people. They don't want to lose out to other communities. They have pride in their community, and they want their schools, their public schools, to be the best. And it worries them that when their neighbors are going off to private schools, because they hear, as Ms. Randall, you were talking about, what's going on at East? And they don't walk in the halls. And they say, well, we better go somewhere else. They don't want that to happen in their community. So I don't know where the board, and I don't know if you can respond to that now, but I'm wondering if it's time to look beyond Madison and to look within and say, what can we do in our own circles to try to deal with this problem, with both morale and the leadership amongst the administration and also the money that comes to the board. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk.
Mr. Coffey, I want to hear your comment, and I have been, as chair, a little clunky on responding to public comments, so forgive me if I continue in my clunky ways, but I will try here. If you and a group of citizens believe that that is a path that should be considered or pursued, I would urge you, as with any group of citizens on any topic that you believe in, to keep your communication amongst yourselves going, and you can come to the board and to Dr. Ertl with ideas, suggestions. Our door is open to communications from interest groups. Your interest is the students, so, and in the operations of the school district. And if you see a particular path that you wish to have considered, then please come to us again with additional discussion requests and things as such. If you walk away and don't do that, well, not so likely anything will move. And I don't want to say the burden is on you, but to somehow paraphrase FDR, make us do it. And as he said, make me do it. And he wasn't meaning, I'm stubborn and I won't unless you make me. He was saying that the public will have to support some things for them to come to pass. Sure. So the more support you bring to us, the more likely it is we will go to that place that you call the taboo, or some say the taboo place. And just as with all topics, I urge everyone to continue to talk with the board if you believe a subject should stay in the discussion.
And as I'm a novice, I would look forward to further guidance from the board on how to go forward. But I think there is an interest in the public to pursue that path a little bit more. Okay. So I thank you for your...
My phone number is 456-9500. You can find me anytime.
Thank you very much.
If you wish to start a discussion topic on any educational matter of interest, you may petition your board, so to speak, to use some kind of formal political science language, to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
I want to leave my phone number with him as well.
oh, well,
No, I'm not kidding.
no, I understand. I'm not
I use
wanting,
that word.
but wait, please, I'm trying to keep a little bit of order. I was trying to give something tangible so that people could know immediately how to reach us. I work during the day, so if I get 6,000 phone calls, I'm going to have a hard time. But let's keep it coming to the president, to the superintendent. Everyone, all of us, our phone numbers and our addresses are on the district website. And I hope it's easy to find. Just look under school board.
Yep.
And so, and Mr. Cronery, do you have a response?
Your comments triggered a thought in me, and it's a thought I've had from time to time, and I see people smiling already. But we talk about the money that we get from the state is fixed, that our budget is completely fixed. And I've mentioned this from time to time, but we sometimes act like everything we do in the district has to stay the way it is. We've always done it that way, so we're always going to do it that way. We're always going to have a particular class size. We're always going to have a certain number of activities after school. We're always going to do everything the same way. And I think that if we're really serious about providing stable careers for people and having a community that teachers want to live in and be in and providing a good education, and if salary is going to be one of the critical components, we might sometimes sit down and reevaluate our programs, because we could free up money by having fewer employees in the district. So if we really do need to bump up salaries to change the perception of the district and to change the attitudes of the employees, it might be time to have a discussion to say, well, we've had one of the lowest class sizes averages in the elementary school almost anywhere. Is it time to bump that up again a little bit and free some salary money so that we can have greater benefits elsewhere? There are a lot of different things that we could consider if we wanted to free up money to place in the salary structure. Now, opening that conversation is kind of dangerous, and we might find out the community is going to roar and say, we want things exactly the way they are, and that's fine. But we might find out also that there are maybe priorities have shifted, and there's different things we could do to free up money and to support teachers financially in a different way and maybe even improve education in the district. So I think for me, you triggered the thought that we shouldn't be afraid of having those discussions. If we have those discussions and we find out that it's not right to make a change, we don't make it. But we might find out there are ways we can make changes within the district to use our budget more efficiently so that we can compensate our teachers maybe at a higher level. So that, I just to say that you triggered that thought in me.
And just so I'm on the record, I personally wouldn't advocate for higher class sizes being a teacher, but I think the conversation is good, and we need to look at all the options in this new competitive world that we're living in. So thank you again for your...
I would like to make a comment, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, please, Mrs. Randall.
My comment is, Mr. Coffey, that I believe your focus is on additional revenue. And Mr. Meyer made the point that we do not lay off teachers. So I'm with you. We've talked, within committees about the fact that we have to start thinking of new ways of gaining revenue. And I wouldn't agree with Mr. Croner's idea of, fewer teachers and bigger classes. I don't even view that as a revenue. I view that more as a deficit. So, but I think getting more creative about revenue is a whole different discussion. So let's go for it. Let's look at it.
Yes, and I, as chair, prefer that we avoid characterizations. I know where Mr. Croner is coming from, so I know his intentions are good, but fear or courage, people say that was a courageous vote, Mr. Meyer. Well, it was a logical vote. I prefer to go where the logic takes us, and as does Mr. Croner, who always wants to look at data. So I never have ever thought Mr. Croner's comments or votes had to do with courage or fear. They had to do with logic. So I'm just trying to emphasize the self-evident process we try here. And also, Mr. Coffey, we find that people who begin their dialogue with the school district and involvement on one particular issue, often once they put their toe in the water, decide they want to participate on many issues, which we encourage. So thank you very much. Was there any other board comment or any board response to this? Okay. Is there any other community comment? Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chaney.
Thank you.
Very fine report. Next, we move to the superintendent's report. On September 10th, we had a school board in service with a very fine facilitator who's quite expert in leadership, guidance, and training. Mr. Bill Hughes, former superintendent from the Greendale School District. Thank you,
Sorry.
Mrs. Rios.
Greenfield, Greendale.
Oh,
Hey.
well, yes. Mrs. Rios is from one of those districts, right?
Yes, Greendale.
Okay, thank you. So, we had a sincere, heartfelt discussion that evening. There were many suggestions given to us by Bill Hughes, and I had this wild idea that somehow we could embody some of the points of consensus into the, or points of future discussion into the meeting minutes. I don't know whether that's a good idea or not, but I thought I'd try. So I know Mrs. Mufeld came with a red line. Did you come with
Yes.
a red line suggestion sheet
Yes, I did.
for this? So some of the things that Mr. Hughes said, one of them was that a formal calendar of reports is desirable. And an extension of that was that from a formal calendar of reports aligned with the district development plan, so that we periodically report on items that are in the superintendent's focus. He suggested that the board have, and I believe the word was a covenant, is that the word he used? To come to some consensus on how we will conduct ourselves and approach things. And that, and with respect to the calendar of reports, that we stick to that calendar unless there is some pressing issue that comes up. There was also a desire to improve communication with the community. All right, is there, Mrs. Mufeld, you did a lot to bring this in-service together. Do you have any comments, for example, here that you'd like to offer on this? Not to put you on the spot, but just to give you the respect that you certainly earned and deserve from all the work you did for this.
Well, thank you. I'm trying to serve my colleagues in this role and to help us, be a better leadership team, I guess, if you will. So I thought the session was very good. Of course, I have an idea of what our next session should look like, but certainly I would like to, proceed with the documents if that's what we're going to discuss as a next step.
Well, unfortunately, my electronic copy is sitting on the counter at home as I ran out the door. So a failing on my part, a leadership gap at the chair. So do you have anything, Dr. Ertl, that you'd like to discuss here specifically?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the minutes, and that was gathered from comments from the board and from the actual meeting, I think actually all three of these agenda items or report items, boardroom configuration and annual reports to the board, I think you've addressed kind of, and all three of them meld together as far as direction and discussion. But I did put together the tentative board agenda items, and I put the relationship to the district development plan, whether it was last year, and in one case it was 2 years ago, for reports to the board. And I guess I would be interested to hear the comments and thoughts on that, as well as, I think there were some, like you mentioned, good things with the minutes about direction for the board.
Well, one of the things in my idea about putting specifics in the minutes was that he suggested a covenant. Well, what a convenient opportunity point for us to start is with the minutes. It can be changed, evolved, enhanced, edited at later dates as the board so chooses, but it does embrace our work product from the evening if we do that kind of thing. But I'm not locked into any particular path here. I'd like to hear what the board thinks in those regards as well. So is there any board comment? Mrs. Randall,
I
please.
guess my understanding was that we were going to do tonight's board agenda. We were going to look at the tentative board agenda items. What was the other? I mean, so we can actually do something. The boardroom configuration.
Yes.
And I guess that's what I thought we were going to do. So we have something concrete
Well, then,
that we're doing.
what I'd like to do is on the next agenda, we will notice approval of the minutes of the in-service. Dr. Ertl will compile our individual board communications to him on our best recollection on what we thought is desirable. It's not an ironclad contract, but if people are wanting to change what is proposed for minutes, we could offer amendments at the next meeting. But I think that's a way to move past the question of how to handle the minutes and at least some kind of starter covenant. And then we move now to the board configuration discussion and the annual reports to the board.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Question.
Mr.
So
Guerriero.
we're not discussing the minutes tonight?
We may, if we wish. I wasn't, you know, if you want to, I will. I call them
Wasn't that
Mrs. Randall.
part of the purpose of the?
Yep, absolutely. If people want to discuss it, let's go. Do you like to make some comment, Mr. Croner?
I do have an initial comment.
All right, let's have, thank you.
I would propose that we strike the first item that we agree to a covenant for meeting operations. And the reason for that is, if you look at our bylaws for membership, we have a section titled Board Member Ethics that deals with mutual respect, trust, character, responsibility, and improvement. And I think that if you look at the bullet points in there, it covers everything that I think all board members would agree that that covers all the behavior that we expect of good board members, and it would be a doubling of our effort to write yet another document that's not a policy to cover the same thing. So if we want to work maybe on that policy and tweak it a little bit, we could do that. But I don't think we really need to write a separate covenant of conduct when we have such a detailed description in our policies already.
Is there any other board comment with respect to this?
I don't know, I thought,
Oh, yes, another thing. Board members are supposed to be recognized by the chair. And I'm supposed to enforce the 3-minute limit of a community comment, so I'm encouraged as chair to maintain a firmer hand on the order of the meeting. So, yes, Mrs. Randall, I will recognize you.
thank you. Yeah, that's fine. A covenant, whether you call it a covenant or a policy for how we act at meetings, whatever, but it definitely needs some discussion. You know, if we're going to use the current policy, we need to be talking about, are we all abiding by it? So you can call it whatever you want, but to the same end. And, looking at that, we may change our mind and we may decide we want a covenant. I believe Dr. Hughes was pretty persuasive in talking about reasons why you might do that. So, but I don't know that tonight is really the venue
Well, we.
to do that. I mean, I think maybe an agenda item of reviewing our current policy and,
We could change the first item to school board will consider or discuss a covenant
sure.
for meeting operations. And then we could more fully work through everybody's thoughts. My view with respect to the covenant proposal is that Dr. Hughes came in as a well-experienced expert on guiding leadership groups, and this is one of the items he most believed in. So either we submit ourselves to his guidance or we do not. And I don't feel like I'm selling my soul to submit to this covenant proposal. I'm not commenting on whether I personally believe in it, just to say I'm wanting to give his program a chance in good faith. And therefore, I may agree with what Mr. Croner says. I may believe that that no such agreement or covenant will have a practical effect. I may believe it's a great idea, but that doesn't matter. I want to try to accept the coaching from Dr. Hughes and see how that works out. So that's just my view. Is there any other view here? Yes, could Mrs. Fee go? Okay, yes.
Thank you. I don't have any objection to changing it to "will discuss." I think that that's a more accurate reflection of what we talked about, because I think it's also fair to point out that Dr. Hughes, or Mr. Hughes, I'm not sure if he's a PhD, but anyway, he's not familiar with our policies. So it's possible that he could read the policy that we have and say, this serves as your covenant. So I think it's a good topic for conversation, but I don't know that we are going to need to develop something different. It might be that we already have it.
Or
not.
maybe we need something more specific to address
Certainly.
particular inefficiencies in our process.
Yes.
And Mr. Croner, please.
That was going to be my comment, that Mr. Hughes may have had what we already have in our policy in mind when he thought of a covenant. So.
All right. That suggestion duly noted for the minutes, and the minutes, as I'm seeing Dr. Ertl craft them now, will reflect these comments. All right. Is there any other comment? Mrs. Muehlfeld, yes.
Yes, so as long as we're sticking with the minute document, I just made some typographical additions, which I will pass along to the superintendent. But the one of substance I wanted to talk about was the 6th bullet point, where we talk about the public comment and the 3 minutes, and then the idea of we have a very engaged community. So when they come to the microphone, even though our discussion evolved around the fact that this is a board business meeting in public and that the public may comment, the public likes to be engaged. And how can we better respond and answer questions? If we, on the evening, we may be able to, but sometimes we may need to follow up. What kind of mechanism and what kind of process can we have around that? So I thought that was reflected in our discussion. So I changed this last bullet point to reflect that idea. Was that everyone else's understanding of?
What did you say?
So, I mean, I have a red line of that. If you want to read that portion of it, it might be easier, or I can just read it out loud.
Why don't you read it?
Sure. Basically, I said, meeting chair, so we were really referring to the, board officer, running the meeting as the meeting chair, capital C, will manage comments during public comment. Each community member / public speaker shall have a 3-minute limit, which is at the discretion of the meeting chair. Community members that request information or ask questions that cannot be immediately addressed by the meeting chair or the chair's designee, who the chair designates as the person to answer, will be asked to leave their contact information with the superintendent's assistant so that a school district representative can contact and follow up with them. So that is how I wanted to operationalize or put in a new process based on our discussion in the minutes.
Would you email your suggestion to Dr. Ertl, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Is there any other board comment? Yes, Mrs.
I would
Grant.
just say I heard the same thing that Mrs. Meehlfeld heard, that we were in agreement to do that, so.
Okay. All right. Dr. Ertl, do you have some thoughts about boardroom reconfiguration?
Over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of discussions about this configuration and the fact that it is a meeting of the school board held in public, and the school board isn't really in a situation where you're looking at each other, having that kind of discussion, and it seems that every time we get into a different configuration, whether it's an in-service meeting or some other, that it seems to be more engaged conversation between board members, and it's not just board members commenting, it actually becomes board discussion. So there were some discussions a while back, and we had, actually the business office did some research and brought together a couple of different options and different ways to look at it. And I guess my question is, does the board want me to pursue that and look at something that would be a different type of configuration, and basically more of a, let's say a U-shape or some kind of configuration where you guys are facing each other more?
Oh, if I may add that I have one of the, well, it was a criticism of our operation and how I conduct the meetings, and during a phone call that was made to me, included the comment that the way we're seated doesn't lend itself to folks really understanding that this is a meeting of the board and not a meeting with the community. I'm paraphrasing a bit and taking some liberties there with the theme of what was said. And it was only one person's opinion, but just to share that with the board. Now, I've personally been, I believed in the idea of a U shape or a circle shape, but I just didn't, I don't want to say have the guts, but I earlier suggested we don't use courage or fear terms. It didn't seem logical at the time to propose spending $12,000 to reconfigure the board seating, but it seems to be an idea that's come into more favor. Mrs. Rios?
I think it would help that we face each other. I don't like having to do this anytime I want to say something. Whether it costs, I don't know what the cost is. I think we don't need to spend $12,000 to have tables that face each other more. I mean, I haven't seen anything, but I'm just saying I don't think it should cost $12,000.
Furniture is expensive, but it's a not to exceed. I don't think, I mean, I'm looking at one right now that's $6,500 plus the one additional piece is the cameras, and making sure the cameras can adjust.
Okay. Okay.
There would be one additional camera in the
Right.
installation with that, so.
Yeah, I would be in favor of looking at an alternative arrangement.
Mrs. Randall?
I would also, one of the things that occurred to me when we've been getting feedback about people coming to the meetings and making comments and being heard or not heard, one of the things that occurred to me is people probably aren't aware that these meetings are the only time that the seven of us are here, are talking. Because of open meetings laws, we don't take up substance issues in between meetings. So truly, this is the only time that the seven of us are here. And so it is important that, we keep our focus initially on talking to each other. So I support looking for something different.
Mrs. Fee?
I know I'm in the minority here, but I don't have any problem with the setup. So I just want to at least voice that I don't have any problem turning my head to talk to people. It doesn't mean I'm turning my back on Phil, but I hope you're not offended. But I certainly would not like any arrangement which has us with our back to the citizens who come to the meeting. So I presume, given the tenor of what's happened before my comment here, that this is going to go forward. I would just ask, please, that we not have our backs on the people who are coming to the meeting.
I will say that none of the configurations we looked at has it that way.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Meyer?
Ms. Meyer?
Oh, yes, who was next?
Oh, probably.
Mr. Crowder, did you have something?
I did. I thought Sharon was motioning for me to speak, but I could have been.
All right.
You can't see her.
I do have a comment.
I have to say I'm really opposed to taking any action in this area. I mean, I think this table is fine. Any lack of board interaction is not because of the shape of the table. And to be honest, I would wish we were talking about student achievement data or some other aspect of student learning rather than the shape of the table. I find this a difficult conversation, and especially at a cost of $12,000. I mean, we just talked about how we wanted to create a community where teachers have stable careers. Let's take the $12,000 and make 24 $500 innovation awards and give those out to teachers who think of new ways for students to learn and are particularly successful in the classrooms. And I do think we are meeting with the community when we're like this. I don't want to do anything that separates us more from the community than we already are, and I just think that this table is fine. I think we can operate as efficiently as we need to with this shape of table.
Mrs. Bufeld.
Thank you. I share some of the same concerns as Mr. Croner. However, what I envision going forward is a little bit different scenario. Whatever we do with this room, I would like it to be more interactive, because and I know if Mrs. Weber was here, she would say, stop saying this, Sharon, because the board is important. I know the board is important, but we use this room, and so does the staff. The staff uses this room for in-servicing, and I feel very strongly that whatever setups we have in here, they could possibly be mobile, so that the room could be reconfigured into different types of shapes or positions with microphones or cameras, so that we can have more productive meetings, not only for different board style meetings, if we're going to move into public forum type meetings, but also for the staff, so that they can have also more and better interactive meetings. So if we're going to make the investment, I would like it to be with more of a district-wide staff leadership team focus, and also allowing the community participation in that area.
Thank you. Well, I support some consideration of reconfiguration as well. The leadership expert believes it is a meeting of the board. With respect to various legal seminars I've gone to, the advice I hear is that school board meetings are meetings of the board. I think somehow configuration matters in how we address each other as board members, and that in turn directly affects our effectiveness as a body, which does directly affect student learning, because we actually do have a lot of power. And the more we work together, the more we will be able to promote student learning. So those are just my views. Everybody's had their chance to speak. I'm sure when Dr. Ertl brings specific proposals, they'll be with an eye towards mobility of the configuration, holding the cost well below $12,000. And it certainly is not a done deal by any stretch of the imagination that the board will approve any change. So is there any community comment on this topic? Okay, so let's not, the third item, Dr. Ertl, let's move to that, please, if we may. The annual reports to the board.
The other thought is I could always get handy in the wood shop too and start building some myself.
No.
Sure.
I want to be near the door so I can
you would be
escape,
surprised.
So,
High enough.
so please, Dr. Ertl, go ahead.
I guess any thoughts on the tentative board agenda items? Like I mentioned, it's information from the district development plan. It's what was discussed in the in-service of making sure that we're giving reports on relevant topics, and these are the ones that it pretty much covers, I think, every area in the district development plan one way or another. So any thoughts or comments would be appreciated.
Well, as a starter, I'd like to say I think it would be valuable if on any of these topics, if there are board members with views on what are the key indicators of success with regards to any of these efforts, that we specifically put those into the agenda calendar as items to be addressed. And I don't mean down to minutia. I mean, for example, if we have a report on the Spanish program, well, what are we going to hear? What kind of report is it going to be? What are our success factors that you look to? I would like to know those in advance, so the board has an opportunity to provide input to you on what expectations are for the content of the report. Mrs. Randall, you were first.
July, now, are we going to go back? Specifically, I'm referring to the secondary scheduling committee. It's been a while since we've had an update on that, and there's been some information shared publicly that is not probably the same direction we're going to go. So I would ask if we could bump that up September, October, to get an update on where you're at.
Sure.
And what might be different from the last time we got a report. I think we did the other things under July and August. And this is the last meeting in September, so we'll have to figure out when you're going to do the...
No, this is the first meeting in September.
Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind.
Now,
It's just the way-
may I follow up on your question?
Yeah.
With regard to secondary scheduling, is that in the process of rolling out a program or developing a program? Is that past the committee stage? I mean, what's the life cycle of that development? Where are we now? Is it still a committee endeavor, or is it now in the planning stage of certain directions?
High school, I would say it's not a committee discussion. Middle school, we're still working through a number of issues related to English language arts and just periods in the day and things like that. So that would be certainly worthy of a presentation and discussion.
With regard to the high school, or with regard to the secondary?
I think the middle school would be most appropriate.
Well, would we want to hear your conclusions as to the high school paradigm
Yes.
you want to pursue? So it would be sort of a two-part thing. There would be a
Right.
committee report from the middle school and here's how we're proceeding at the high school level that wouldn't be committee-based in the presentation?
Yeah, I think both of them will be a report from me, ultimately.
All right, okay.
Thanks.
Mrs. Fee?
My main question was about the scheduling as well, so that's already been addressed. I just would add that I'm glad to see that there will be updates on the implementation of some of the new programs we've had over the last couple of years.
Right. Any other board comment? Mr. Croner, please.
Are you looking for suggestions of things to add to the schedule, or just
Or to take off, either way.
We will favor items as the maker of the agenda that are in alignment with the initiatives in the professional development plan. That's my only qualification, that I'll give those preference in a busy schedule.
With the understanding that what I suggest isn't automatically on this schedule, I have a few items, and then it's up to you and Phil to make the final decisions. But I will note that one of the notes I have from our in-service is that every major initiative should have a follow-up review. So I went through thinking some of the things we've done over the past year or so with that in mind. I would like to have at some point an update of the middle school STEM program. That was a major initiative that we started, and we haven't really heard how it's going or what the current shape of that is. We are going to have an update of the Spanish program, which is good, but what I would add to that also is an update on the elementary library program, which has changed at the same time. I'd be curious to know if the function of the libraries is where we wanted them to be, and whether we transferred the teaching of curriculum benchmarks in, I'll say library science, I don't know if that's the right term, to the classrooms. And I was just wondering if that's if we could have an update, is that going well? Are the students learning what we wanted them to learn in the library, in the classroom? Another item I think we should have an update on the virtual academy. It's opened this fall. We haven't really had a formal presentation on the final organization of that. It would be nice to have that before the budget comes out again in October, since we have to approve the budget of that as part of our normal budgetary process.
That, Mr. Croner, just so you know, that is referenced in new learning, January, under new learning environments. So, but I know you're requesting it earlier.
Okay. And one thing that I think would be helpful, I would like to hear an evaluation of the 8th period plan that we had in place last year. We had an 8th period plan at the middle school that was going to be gauged towards, I think it was to help students that were having difficulty in courses get some extra help, or to help people that needed to move forward faster get some extra help. And I was really excited about that plan. I thought it was a really good way to approach helping students in middle school that were having difficulties. And so I was disappointed that it wasn't continued this year. And I think it'd be healthy for us just to review, what were the initial goals? What were the positive outcomes from that? I know there probably were some. What were the negative outcomes, and what did we learn from that we're taking forward? I think that was a really good idea, and I wanted it to work. And I think since it was such a major initiative involving so many students in the district, it would be helpful just to see a wrap-up of what happened with that. Some things we don't normally get that we might consider adding are co-curricular activities report. We don't hear too much about that. I'd like to hear, what's going well in the district, the theater programs, sporting programs, what challenges are we facing? Are there things happening with some of the co-curriculars that we're not really aware of as a board? How many students are participating? Are there any trends that we should be aware of? How can the board help in that area? I think it would be useful maybe once a year just to have a report about those programs in the district and the students that are involved with them. And I think we have a summer school report, and Mr. Meyer, you're asking about benchmarks. I know we have a summer school report, but I was hopefully maybe starting next year, part of that report could include what is achievement like for those students in summer school, and is there a way we could measure the impact of summer school on the students' achievement the following school year? Do we have a program in place to follow those students to see, how positive that is occurring? So I think that's all I have for now. So I will stop.
As a follow-up comment to avoid confusion, the 8-period plan from the middle school area for the past year is not the same as the discussion of the 8-period day for the master schedule. They are different concepts, just to make that clear. All right. Mrs. Rios?
I just want to comment, Mr. Croner, I agree with a lot of the updates, but to have a presentation on co-curricular activities seems very, very broad. I mean, if you take all the co-curricular activities that are offered at the high school, middle school, elementary level, I just think that's, what would you do with that? There'd have to be some focus as to why you want that, because that's a very hard thing to present on without giving a lot of direction and a reason for it.
Do you have any follow-up, Mr. Croner?
Well, I realize it's a big area, and that's part of the reason I asked for it to be a topic. Maybe we could flesh out what it is that could be reported. I think that the data could be collected just to show trends in the areas of what students are participating in, what's not working well. I don't know, it just seemed like a big area of the district that we'd never get any information about. We've not ever had any information about. And it just seemed it would be useful once a year to maybe say, here's where our district sits in that area, here are the things we offer, here are the number of students that participate, and that sort of thing. We get similar reports about summer school or the rec program. I think it would follow along the same lines for me.
Actually, something that might be coming forward is our high school principals, athletic directors, and some coaches have been working on updating the athletic or co-curricular code, and we may have a recommendation, because that is a board policy, to bring to the board at some point in the very near future to implement for the 14-15 school year. So that would certainly relate to co-curriculars and extracurriculars.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
So, to keep our direction on the district development plan and the goals we've laid out there, it sounds to me like we have a vast understanding of what we would like to see in these reports, and I'm not certain that it's always well communicated to Dr. Ertl and his team. I would like to make a suggestion that our next in-service focus on this process of how do we want this information to come forward so that we can decide in a concise manner to give direction to the staff. And I think it's very important that all board members are attending this session. Again, we have a wide variety of understandings among us, and I think it's important to, for a board member who wants some very specific, detailed information, and maybe one that doesn't, to try to come together on what is necessary for us to move forward with our goals in the district development plan. I think it's very, very important, because otherwise I think there'll be confusion and unhappiness among the staff and the district team in coming forward with the information and in a meaningful way so that we can move forward. I feel very strongly about it after tonight's conversation, also after our in-service conversation, that we need to spend some time to gain some agreement and give some expectations. And I think that can be the topic of our next 2-hour in-service. Along with, possibly, if we could also get to discussing the covenant, I think that would help as well. I envision a process in place for, so a board member, for example, who may not have received all of the detailed information during the reporting process, a process for us to communicate that so that, the administration can follow up or not follow up based on what we decide. Is it just an individual board member's needs, and maybe that individual board member must be getting some additional education, and how can that happen? Maybe it's a board in-service topic that we all might want information on if our schedules would allow it. So I think it's very important that we spend some time on this.
Thank you, Mrs. Muehlfeld. Your leadership has been very helpful in this area. I was wanting to know exactly, well, we're going to have reports, but what do we put in these reports? And I was trying to take us in that direction, and you've very eloquently described what we need to do to figure out how we're going to proceed. Is there any other board? Oh, Mrs. Randall.
I agree with Mrs. Muehlfeld on all of that. And also, as you consider these things now, before we have our in-service, to make sure that we are not getting into operational discussions, because it seems like that's where some of these would be headed.
Well, yes,
So-
and, there's all kinds of different ways to do reports,
Yeah.
and all different kinds of data, all different depths you can take data to, all different topics. My interest is, what kind of report, what kind of data will allow the board to have a positive effect on student learning. That it be something where we are taking up the topic will make a difference. So that's just my perspective. So any other board comment? Mr. Croner, please.
I just have a process question. Who owns this board agenda list now? Is it ours, the board's, and will it be coming back for approval?
It
Is
will
it
come
yours,
back
the president's?
It will come back for board vote. When Dr. Ertl has it ready. I'm hoping the next meeting, perhaps, so that we can have a formal consensus on where we're going, or
And-
formal approval, anyways.
You and Dr. Ertl together will decide what the final form of this will be, that is, when it is presented to us for vote?
Well, no, the board will decide. It will be subject to amendment. Typically, in my interaction with Dr. Ertl, my specific request is that there be a reference to the annual development plan, that whatever item we have here prove itself to be in furtherance of us supporting the development plan, and then if there's time left over, we take up other things.
But I guess you might have misunderstood. So will you and Dr. Ertl collaborate on the draft that will be presented for us to vote on?
Dr. Ertl will
Yes,
produce the draft.
we'll work together, Mr.
Well,
Mayor.
of course, we always work together, but
That's
you
what
know.
he's asking, Mike.
Yes, we will work together, but I believe that as a board, we don't fully understand the operational demands that Dr. Ertl's staff is under.
Right.
And it may be that one departmental area is particularly busy at a certain time of year, doing things that directly relate to the students, and that, for example, maybe that time of the year wouldn't be the best time for them to have to produce a report for the board. I want to respect the operational demands of the school district as we set this calendar, and Dr. Ertl is the one to speak to that. So I guess I'm going down into the details about my interaction with Dr. Ertl, but when he thinks it makes sense to produce a report, that is probably where it's going to be proposed on the calendar.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other board comment or question? Okay, any community comment or questions? Seeing none. Oh. You may contact the superintendent's office tomorrow. You may give him,
It's online.
Is it online? Yeah. But just to say, as for all things, if there's a follow-up question about the board meeting,
The calendar.
you may contact the superintendent's office for any documents, if there weren't copies, if you have a question, and what's your preferred way for them to contact your office? Email, phone?
Call, email, stop in.
Okay, open door. Oh, all right. Does that help? Okay, any other community questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll take final public comment on non-agenda items. Okay, no additional public comment. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mrs. Randall, is that correct? Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Mrs. Rios, second. Mrs. Glate, please call the roll.
Mrs. Fee?
Yes.
Mr. Giroux?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Rios?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes. We are adjourned at 8:46.